Thank you, sir. So thanks for that, and General Ham, General McQuistion, Michael, and all at AUSA, thanks for what you do every day for our Army, its soldiers and families, and thanks for hosting this day today on this very important topic. As General Ham said, pleased to moderate this panel alongside Mr. Richard Kidd, panel chair, as this relevant topic, which takes 2 full lines to spell out in my introduction. But so we're all about adapting and modernizing installation power projection in the strategic support area for multi-domain operations. If the morning's panel identified power projection as one of the elements of readiness, this panel is going to hone in on that. But I suspect and hope that because we're going to talk about adapting and modernizing, we'll probably get into other elements of adapting and modernizing the installations as we look towards the future to ensure that we continue to ensure for ready soldiers and ready families. To that end, AUSA has assembled, as usual, an excellent panel with deep expertise and a broad range of perspectives to address this topic. So without spending any more time, I want to introduce the panel and let them make their comments. Already introduced Mr. Richard Kidd, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Strategic Integration at the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Army Installations, Energy and Environment. He will give opening comments, and then he'll be followed in turn by Major General Duane Gamble, currently serving as the Commanding General, U.S. Army Sustainment Command, and notably recently confirmed to serve as our Army's next Deputy Chief of Staff, G4. Then Major General Brian McKiernan, who's currently serving as the Deputy Commanding General, 18th Airborne Corps, and has tremendous experience over the last 2 years as a senior commander there, with other senior commander responsibilities prior to that. Followed by Colonel William Myer, Chief Installation and Environment Division, Army National Guard. We heard the U.S. Army Reserve perspective this morning. This afternoon we'll get the Guard perspective, and I suspect you'll get some similarities. And then we'll finish with Brigadier General Retired J.B. Burton, who's not only a sponsor of this event, and we appreciate that, but serving as a strategic account executive and senior strategist at Leidos. He'll bring an industry perspective to this title. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Kidd.
Great. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank AUSA for hosting this event. General Ham, thanks for letting me come up here again. Also, thanks for pairing me up with General Formica. I've done too many of these with that Prosh guy, so it's good to have a different partner here. So I was part of the collaborative team that worked on the remarks for Secretary Beeler this morning, and the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Mr. Gillis, also this morning. So all of my original work was taken in those 2 speeches. So I'm going to fall back on a time-tested technique that I've learned in government, which is to rely on the words of others. So I'm going to start off with some of the key documents that I think should frame this issue, and then try to bring a few conclusions before we turn it over to this great panel. So we have the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy, which clearly state the homeland is no longer a sanctuary. They articulate that we are in an era of great power competition, and that our near-peer competitors, particularly Russia and China, are extending the battle space, all right, extending this competition in time. So it's not just a binary, we're at peace, we're at war, but we're at competition. So they move the time earlier, all right? They said that they are extending these documents say that our adversaries are extending the competition across domains. So it's no longer air-land battle. There's also cyberspace and space. And they are extending the competition across geography, again, to us here in the homeland. So our first sort of, if you will, my first sort of initial conclusion I'd like us all to take away is our installations are in contact with the enemy right now. All right, the enemy is doing intelligence preparation of the battlefield, not just on our formations, probably not just on our energy readiness exercises, but also on the social media content of our soldiers and their families. All right, the Army has an Army strategy which is derived from the national defense and national security strategies. All right, in that Army strategy, it outlines the phase lines that we heard earlier, phase line ready, modern, and overmatch, and it defines an end state. the end state vision of the Army of 2028 will be ready to deploy, fight, and win against any adversary, anytime, anywhere, in a joint, combined, multi-domain, high-intensity combat, etc. All right? So after the ability, we will be ready. The first verb is to deploy. All right? That's the first action verb in the Army vision of the Army strategy. So and I concluded that definition. I stopped where it said multi-domain. So you've heard reference to this document, multi-domain operations. Mine is actually tabbed and highlighted. I did some of that work, but most of it was to Shelley. I would have done much better in college if I would have had a tabbed and highlighted textbook. But anyway, so inside the multi-domain operations, the doctrine that we're going to use to achieve that end state, it creates a framework that defines the strategic support area as this is where forces gain their combat power, sustain operations, and project power. All right? And then it goes on in Annex C to state that the enemy will attack the strategic support area to disrupt and degrade deployments. So those are all exact quotes. So if we add all of that up, what does that mean? Well, I think when we talk about adapting and modernizing our installations, it's more than just a facilities equation. It's more than just getting our buildings up to Q1, all right? It's about actually preparing those installations and the units and the organizations responsible for a mindset to fight a contested deployment. So I'm an amateur historian, and I cannot think of an example where the Army has had to deploy in a contested environment here in the United States. Maybe there were some German U-boats who took out some Army soldiers, but here in the United States, we've had pretty much a frictionless deployment process with any confusion, created by ourselves and not necessarily an adversary. And that's going to change, all right? So who is going to fight the fight? And what are they going to fight that fight with in this contested deployment operation? I would submit, that just as TRADOC prepares combat-ready soldiers and FORCECOM prepares combat-ready formations, that we in the installation community need to start to think about preparing combat-ready installations. And this is important, I would submit that this is important not just from the Army's perspective or the installation's perspective or the families, soldiers and families that live on the installations. All of that is good and right, but this is really a strategic issue. So the best way to win those wars is to prevent them, and you prevent them through deterrence. If an adversary knows that the U.S. Army cannot deploy, we have undermined the national deterrence equation, all right? And we've eliminated strategic choice for national command authority. It is a lot harder, so it's hard. It is hard to defend the Baltics. It is hard to defend South Korea. It is much harder to reconquer the Baltics or to reconquer a unified Korean peninsula. And the idea is that the adversary would not necessarily have to take down the national grid or do a catastrophic kinetic strike. If they can just create enough little points of friction in the unguarded attack surfaces, whether that's a social media feed from the daycare center to the stoplights in Fayetteville, if they can just interject enough time so that the 18th Airborne Corps and the Guard and others can't get to where they need to be, they've imposed a strategic outcome on the United States and taken away strategic choice. And at the State Department, I learned that what is the definition of national power? It's having strategic choice. So if we don't fix this issue, we constrain America's national power. So that's a big proposition, but we have a great panel that can certainly tackle that and other questions. So on our panel, just to set the concept, so you have AMC, all right, that is now responsible for the strategic support area, all things budget, as well as the installations, all right? So this is going to set the strategic framework. You have the 18th Airborne Corps, the nation's strategic reserve, and one of the units that is on call to deploy and to fight through that contested deployment environment. You have the National Guard, which now deploys all the time. We have Guard brigades either deployed or deploying or preparing to deploy. And as you know, they bring the majority of the combat power where the United States to go into full mobilization. And then, of course, our industry partners, which are so critical to providing those technical solutions. So I think this is a great panel. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And General Formica, I guess back to you.
Good. Thank you, sir. And General Gamble.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. And to General Ham and AUSA, thanks for the opportunity. Can we have the first chart, please? So I have a couple charts just to give you something to look at while I'm speaking. So here we go. So I'm here representing General Perna and Army Materiel Command. And as Mr. Kidd pointed out, General Perna sees himself as being the synchronizer of the strategic support area. So not alone in the strategic support area, of course. There's many Army commands and a lot of folks. But in terms of power projection and installation operations, General Perna sees himself as uniquely placed to really get the synergy across all the enterprise. So on the right of this chart, you'll see multi-domain operations, a little visual there about the complexity of multi-domain operations. If you look just to the northwest of that are the 7 strategic focus areas that General Becker talked about earlier, but this will give you something to look at. And they range on the left from installation readiness all the way to the right to logistics information readiness. And you can see in the middle there, roughly in the middle, strategic power projection readiness is a key component of that. And then at the bottom, you'll see the battlefield framework that's been illuminated a couple times already. And the focus on the strategic support area, and that focus is illuminated by the green block there. So moving to this next chart, since the last premier networking session that Army has every year, so since last AUSA, the complexion of AMC has changed a bit. So we're now, if you look at the top right corner of this chart, the gray box, you'll see that Research Development and Engineering Command, RDECOM, is no longer part of Army Materiel Command, but then you'll see 2 new teammates, MCOM in the top left, and then Army Medical Logistics Command in the bottom right. And then just to the left in the green box is a little bit of an explanation, some one-liners on General Perna's strategic focus areas, those 7 areas that he has us focused on. So now we move from pretty refined messaging and refined work to a little bit of a raw think piece. And this is mine. I have showed it to General Perna. He does a quarterly update with all his subordinate commanders. And he came by our headquarters a couple weeks ago when I threw this up just to talk to him, talk through really the title of his first chart. How do we operationalize all the power of the material enterprise focused on against his strategic focus area? So please don't take anything on this chart literal. I'll point out where I think where the chart is a little unrefined. But here's the purpose of the chart. First at the top is General Perna's strategic focus areas. The next line is meant my interpretation of the enterprise, right? The installation enterprise, the material enterprise, all the teamwork that comes together, and it's not by design that MCOM's at the top of each of those. It's just cut and paste. But you can see there's an enterprise approach, and that really exists at the operational level. And to quote General Perna, right? He's focused on the strategic level. He expects the commander subordinate to him and the other teammates to figure it out at the 2- and 3-star level below him. In my words, that generates the power of the material enterprise. It generates the power of the installation enterprise. And then at the tactical level is the delivery. And so I recognize it says supporting and supported. I do recognize, I mean, this is internal to me and AMC, that the supported commander is the senior commander. No bones about it. So maybe it should say supporting effort, main effort, all toward the senior commander. But for the sake of internal to AMC, you can see who I believe the supported commander is, or the main effort, the person that ought to be integrating the material enterprise effects. And I hope you'll ask me questions about that and my views there. So last chart, a little SWOT analysis on where I think we are on installation power projection capability, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I'll point out a couple. First, at the top, you'll notice, not by design, that if you just count the strengths, they outweigh the weaknesses, right? So, and that's not by design. I mean, literally, I think we have more strengths and weaknesses. I think the glass is half full when it comes to power projection of our Army. I also believe that the Army power projection has three major components. Our ability to project power from an installation, and that's a senior commander operation, make no bones about it. The senior commander is the one that the Army holds responsible to project power from installation. So I recognize our role in AMC is to enable that senior commander, but maybe even more importantly, to set the strategic conditions for success. And it's really three things. It's the power projection platform itself, and this SWOT analysis talks about that in terms of infrastructure and equipment and manpower, the AMC component of that. And then it's the strategic lift. And earlier panel day talked about weight and motion scales and how we could use technology to optimize our strategic lift. And then the last piece is Army pre-positioned stocks, and whether those are literally APS or they're contingency stocks that are pre-positioned strategically to give us speed and endurance and strategic options. So I do think the strengths outweigh the weaknesses. Having said that, the weaknesses are significant, and the opportunities there, frankly, I cheated a little bit. I put, in terms of manpower, A76 reform and Randolph-Shepard reform as opportunities, but they are significant weakness. We are constrained by legislation in some areas. So I hope you'll ask me questions on that. I hope you'll challenge anything I told you that I think that the glass is half full. If you think the glass is half empty, I hope you call me out on it. I'm pleased to be here. I look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thanks, Duane. And General McKiernan, please.
I think there's one slide there. Oh, you work that.
Oh, east is forward.
Okay. Just something to look at while I provide what I hope is kind of a different view, and that's a view from the senior commander perspective, because I'll tell you from down on the ground, it definitely looks different. So we've had a lot of conversation today. I think the good thing right off the bat is that the Army has done a great job of defining the problem. And I think you just heard Mr. Kidd lay it out, and so I don't have to reiterate it. But I mean, in simple terms, our adversaries can and will disrupt our ability to project power from our installations in the strategic support area. I think we should take it as a fact and plan accordingly. So as you look at force projection platform, the installation becomes a critical capability of expeditionary warfare and an expeditionary army in multi-domain operations. It's an actual, it's where strategic movement and maneuver begins. You know, and so there's a lot of requirements in order for that to happen, and it's all being synchronized at the installation level. So we need a robust network, transportation network, road, rail, air terminals, access to ports. I could have easily added the Port of Wilmington on there as well, because we're going to go wherever they can take us. And fuel storage and distribution capability. The installation at the same time is not just projecting power, but it served as a mission command platform for our forces to theater, through theater, and I would even say in theater, especially for our rapid deployment forces. Often we'll find ourselves conducting mission command from host nation, or I'm sorry, from our installation mission command facilities. And then also, obviously, as a training and readiness platform builder, not just for the initial forces, but for the follow-on forces that might be required to use our ranges. So that all requires a number of things, and I'd say first and foremost, a reliable C2 network. And right behind that, assured power, electrical power and energy, a resilient energy source, and then obviously the ability to physically secure it. So if you think about that, you know, it's kind of the conditions you have to set in order to project power. I kind of would like to expand a little bit on Secretary Beeler's comments this morning on the Fort Bragg exercise, the energy resilience readiness exercise, because I think it brings out a couple of key points that go beyond just maybe energy resilience. Some of the same things we learned through doing those exercises actually translate to some of the other key interdependencies that we have. But bottom line, in April, Fort Bragg conducted probably the most extensive energy resilience readiness exercise to date in the DoD. And we conducted it in conjunction with our local private energy provider. So this was a team effort. They had to be cooperative and fully invested themselves. It was no notice, so very few trusted agents, and senior leaders only knew about it the day before. And some of them didn't really have full understanding of exactly what the impact would be. 10-hour power outage scheduled. That's pretty significant. And we did it at the time. We already had a planned emergency deployment readiness exercise for one of our GRF units, and that was by design. And so why? So that we could test our ability to project forces while power was interrupted. So we noticed that we had some key interdependencies. The utility company, and guess what? Our water utilities also dependent on that same energy provider, and they didn't know all of their interdependencies either, and then some interdependencies inside the gate as well. So all these things kind of highlight to us that this is a team of teams that has to make sure that we're able to perform our function. And so those key interdependencies, beyond just the energy resilience exercise, that platform relies on a communications network, state, local emergency services. They had to respond during this exercise, and then private utility partners, obviously, and then the plethora of other Army commands, General Gamble being one of the key ones, but we're also dependent on Army Contracting Command, NETCOM, and the Corps of Engineers, to name just a couple others. And so let me just kind of wrap up by providing what I think are some of the things we need to be asking ourselves as we modernize our installations to contend with this environment. We need to be expansive in our view and see the installation as a contiguous part of the battlefield framework, as I think we are. Our IPB and vulnerability assessments, they need to extend beyond the boundary of the installation. They need to incorporate and encompass everything from our private utility providers, transportation networks, info networks, and our communications networks. Collaboration and coordination on mitigating these vulnerabilities, that has to be a team effort. It's an interagency and intergovernmental requirement. And so I think senior commanders need a framework in order to do that. How do we think about that problem setting? Because it's different from installation to installation. I think the other thing I would say is we need to take a hard look at our doctrine for installation operations. The doctrine is required. We need a force modernization proponency like we have in TRADOC for all the other warfighting functions. For this role, I do believe it needs to be elevated to that level so that we're running our operations on our garrisons as operations, not managing cities. And that means we're probably going to have to make some adjustments to our garrison structure and authorizations there at the garrisons. And so I'll leave it at that and look forward to your questions as we continue the panel.
Thanks, Brian. Colonel Myer.
Can I see the clickers here? Thanks. Okay. Good afternoon. So today I'm going to kind of give you the Guard's perspective of how we fit into strategic power projection. So, on the slide to the left, power projection platforms, mostly Compo 1, primary active MFGIs, Compos 2 and 3. So where we fit into this, we have a primary inactive MFGI at 2 locations. We have Camp Shelby in Mississippi and Camp Atterbury in Indiana. And then contingency MFGI, not currently resourced, Camp Robinson in California, and Gowan Field Orchard Combat Training Center in Idaho. Off to the right portion of the slide, these are just some of the minimal MFGI capabilities that we need to have. Go to the next slide. maybe that. There we go. So just for reference, where those facilities are. So actions completed. So a couple years ago, working with First Army, Army G357, ForceCom, you know, we got more engaged into these MFGIs that the Guard had and maintained. During OEIF and OIF, Guard mobilized units out of Guard training sites. Well, now, you know, things have ramped down a little bit, and we have the primary and the inactive MFGIs. So we've been working on kind of updating where we were with respect to if we were going to do a mass mobilization. So to date, you know, we've added MOB planners, accountable officers, IT support at these facilities. We've also been in deployment support plans, contingency contracts. Prior to a couple of years ago, you know, we weren't really thinking about those. MOB support forces, First Army, training equipment sets. So we're kind of updated what we had going on at our MFGIs. In process right now, we have state installation travel offices we're going to add to those facilities. We've got MOB and movement plans, installation status report, infrastructure reporting. Also doing a MOB exercise for these installations, kind of testing to make sure that the plans and all that are right. And then the energy and water security. So the IEWPs, the installation energy and water security plans. The OSD requirement that said, hey, you need to go out and evaluate what's your critical missions at these facilities to provide water and energy. So in the event, so if we're in the strategic support area and we're mobilizing units, we actually activate these MFGIs. What are our energy and water requirements to keep those operations going? That's really critical to us. So we're in the process of updating those. So future, when you look at the future, we're looking at readiness centers as a docking station. So General McKiernan kind of mentioned mission command, you know, forward deployed at the installation. Well, the same thing with the Guard folks. We have all these mission command systems, but if we don't plug them in and use them, we can't keep them up to date. DSIGs, all these different platforms that we have, we just can't, if we can't use them only when we go to training, you know, we need to be able to use them at the MFGIs as well as our readiness centers to get ready. So another item I wanted to point, it's not out on the slide here, is, you know, this installation modernization. So I know IE&E has a role in that, AXM has a role in that. How do we modernize to meet this multi-domain battle, you know, this requirement for the SSA? So I'll give you an example. I was working with some of my counterparts. We met Army Reserve, Air Force Reserve, Navy Reserve, Marine Corps Reserve, and they were talking about a topic, counter drone defeat. And I'm like, what? And they asked, so Army Guard, what are you doing about counter drone defeat? I'm like, I'm not doing anything about that right now because I'm fighting this near term, you know, with us, you know, when you look at near term, midterm, far term, we're mostly focused on the near term, kind of, you know, fighting the battle with the budgets, the SRM, MILCON, trying to keep our facilities functioning and moving forward. So when it comes to installation modernization, who's coming up with the requirements for, you know, the installations of the future? I know Mr. Kidd had talked about that. You know, how do we get those midterm and far-term installation modernization efforts captured? Because I know I'm not looking at it. I mean, I'm thinking about it, but, you know, do I have budget to do that, to do research and development for counter-drone? Is that my mission? You know, probably not, but we need to think about those types of things at our facilities. So, you know, for us, for like Camp Grayling or Shelby, you know, who's protecting the ASP from a drone attack? No one really today. I can't say that. But so those are the things, you know, when I think of, you know, the future for MFGI and power projection, those are the considerations that we really need to look at. And, you know, as far as who's developing the requirements, you know, that's something I think is kind of a data gap or something that we're missing right now, because we don't, as installations, I think it was mentioned, you know, we don't have for installations, operations, there's no standard doctrine for that, because we're not part of we don't have an infantry school or an armor school or mission command that develops those requirements. And so with Futures Command coming on board and some of these cross-functional teams, you know, maybe that's where it's at. But I know with respect to, you know, acquisition, facilities or installations are always kind of last in the bucket. You know, we'll develop the new tank, but where's the tank going to go, you know, on the installation? Same with, you know, some of these modernization efforts, you know, for the installation. So with that, I will pass it on.
Thanks, Bill. JB.
I'm on. Am I supposed to push the little button to make that slide go? If I am, I may not be skilled to do that. There we go. There we are. I'm going to use that as a backdrop and do my best to try to talk to that. First question, General Ham, do I get to keep this pen? Yes. This is awesome. All right. First off, thanks to AUSA, General Ham, General Formica, Mr. Kidd for the invitation and the opportunity to participate in this discussion about our Army's home, Army installations. Leidos is a proud sponsor of this event. We're proud to be a member of the AUSA team, and I'm humbled to be able to sit on this panel. As an infantryman, the title of this panel kind of gave me a bit of start because it's a little bit longer and polysyllabic, but nonetheless, what I see after listening to the dialogue this morning from all the tremendous speakers is the value of opportunities like this. It provides us all the opportunity to explore ideas, hear and think about things early, and really start gelling around the things and opportunities that are best for our Army as we travel into the future to meet some of those milestones that were laid out earlier today. What I'd like to talk a little bit about this afternoon is leveraging the power of the Internet of Things to achieve Army installations as a cohesive system to enhance force protection, home station training, and power projection platform efficiencies. And as stated previously, the Army installations where readiness is built, the platform on which most of our soldiers live and their families, and that location from which ready forces are projected. And those platforms must be secure, effective, and efficient to fulfill their vital role in delivering ready forces for an expeditionary Army. This Internet of Things provides a pathway to better understanding of both force, installation, readiness. And today I'll address three areas for consideration: force protection, quality of life, and home station training. And under the idea of force protection and physical security, I offer the thought that it all starts at the perimeter and continues through to critical infrastructure. Physical security, access control enabled through enterprise solutions which vet each individual continuously who attempt to enter the installation against both our DoD and national law enforcement databases provides a layer of security that you cannot achieve with folks flipping ID cards. And while it provides some degree of comfort to have armed guards on the gates, as it should, consider the difference between a guard or some great barred military manpower soldier who is eyeballing ID cards, and compare that with those same physical security personnel having the ability to mechanically scan each credential presented and then automatically vet those individuals against the DMDC database and national law enforcement databases, including terrorist watch lists, to validate, one, their fitness for entry, and two, their authority to be on that installation. This provides those force protection personnel with an extra layer of comfort, provides the ability not only to ensure that who's coming on post ought to be on post, but while the machines are doing their work in the background, that allows our law enforcement personnel to continue to do their law enforcement functions, looking people in the eyeball, scanning over the card, and actually witnessing behavior, as opposed to just trying to remember what day it is and whether or not that ID card is expired. And certainly they do more than that. Tethering that installation access control point to a cloud-enabled continuous vetting solution provides an immediate enhancement for securing our installations, ensuring that only those with the appropriate fitness and authority for entry are actually allowed on post. And we've proven that out. We're seeing that now with the Army exercising that, where folks that have routinely entered posts in the past, when turned on with some of these automatic vetting installations, were immediately discovered to actually have extraditable warrants off to various sundry places that had been delivering donuts in some cases to directors of emergency services, and often to high-ranking officials' offices. So it gives a level of comfort knowing that when the soldiers and formations are deployed, having that layer of security on those installations is just one less thing for our warfighters to worry about. Couple those solutions with intrusion detection, standoff biometrics capabilities, in-depth pan, tilt, zoom, and tracking cameras, computer-aided dispatching to provide real-time understanding of potential perimeter and interior facility breaches, insider threats and continuous authentication and verification. Each of our Army's power projection platforms has a host of critical infrastructure that's critical and essential to the readiness of the force. Command posts, motor pools, fuel, ammunition storage and distribution facilities, power generation and storage facilities, communications infrastructure, mission command networks, barracks, housing areas, schools, and hospitals. Is who is there supposed to be there? And do we have a means of ensuring that who's there has an authority to be on those grounds? When you integrate all of that into a federated information system enabled force protection solution to ensure access is only to those who have a confirmed need, you now have a second layer of protection that informs our senior decision makers about the security of their facilities. We heard from a great family member this morning, and efficiency and effectiveness and quality of life is something I want to add into this discussion. It's a logical assumption that the majority of soldiers and family members located on Army posts are there because they have orders to be there. That's how the Army works. But still, soldiers arrive and in process and then consume reams of paper and gallons of ink, filling out sheets of paper explaining who they are, why they're there, where they're going, and who their family members are, when in fact the Army already knows all that information. Similar activities happen at hospitals and clinics when signing in for treatment, be it scheduled or unscheduled, or when finally departing the service. And our soldiers carry with them the accordion folder, filled with all those personnel records, training and medical records, which if fully digitized and cloud-enabled, could just intersect with those soldiers at the point of need, wherever they swipe their CAT card. And a smart installation with that location where the CAT card is swiped knows its function, and it reaches into the cloud to retrieve that data which is pertinent to the soldier and the family member. And I've run over time, but I'm going to run through this real quick.
We're good.
Home station training, and in particularly virtual and constructive training programs. For senior commander, actually for anybody that's worn a suit, I think this probably applies. That painful routine of establishing a meaningful, large-scale constructive training exercise has historically been achieved through a series of arduous processes, sometimes referred to as LODEX or STARDEX, or what I like to call it, abuse of the lieutenants and specialists. Weeks of inputting unit data, personnel data, location data, logistics data, ammunition fills, and in days of leaders confirming that all is exactly right before STARDEX is allowed to commence. It's something we're all familiar with. Consider this, though. That commander, that leader of the training audience, is a known entity of the Army. He's got orders to be there. He's got orders associated with the unit. The Army knows who the commander is. They put him there. And the Army knows exactly which unit that commander is in charge of. And if the data is properly collected, captured, and ingested, the Army knows the readiness of that unit down to the soldier level. If all that is true, then that commander's CAT card, or whatever credential he presents or her presents, could serve as their key to the initiation of the training exercise of their choice, reaching into the cloud for immediate access to and generation of synthetic forces, a realistic representation of their own troops and formations, because you got to fight with what you got, and you got to go where the Army tells you to go, in an operational environment of the commander's choosing, including installation first responders and in facilities like Brian McKiernan was talking about earlier. Approaching the Army's installation as a system enabled by the power of the cloud, data analytics, machine learning, provides our Army, from the senior-most commanders to the individual soldier and their family members, with immediate access to the right types of data for the right purposes, and provides for both enhanced security of our power projection platforms, improved quality of life for our most important resources, and more time to focus on generating readiness that our Army and our nation depends upon. And with that, I look forward to answering any questions. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. You may not have picked up on it. Yeah, thanks, panel. You may not have picked up on it, but we actually had 3 anomalies in this panel. First, it wasn't until I was retired that I learned that you have to flip your own slides. I always thought next slide, please, worked. So I want to congratulate General Gamble, General McKiernan, and Colonel Myer for flipping their own slides without ever uttering those words. Second, I learned from Mr. Kidd that you can actually read Army documents and then base decisions off what we've written. That's good. All right, I didn't know we were supposed to do that. And then third, we had a panel that was disciplined and stayed to their time limit. So we've got plenty of time for your thoughtful questions. We've got several in already, and I look forward to you continuing the discussion. First question I'm going to ask, Colonel Myer alluded to this in his comments, and we had three that are all very similar. So I'm going to combine them, and I'm going to ask Mr. Kidd take first cut at it. And then for this and any of the other questions, any other panel members want to offer a thought, please do. But this one's very specific to, as Army Futures Command is looking to develop new capabilities, 6 Army modernization priorities, 8 CFTs. They're going to develop systems and modernization kit that needs to be considered on our installations. What are the requirements for them? How are ACSIM, IMCOM, ASAINE, how are they tied into Army Futures Command and the work that they're doing so that our installations are brought into this at the beginning and not as an afterthought? And I think I've summarized 3 of the questions with that. So, Mr. Kidd.
Great. I'll start, and if any of their panel members want to jump on. So, before the end of the month, the Army is on track to publish the Army Modernization Strategy, which was principally authored by Lieutenant General Wesley and his team working in Army Futures Command. The Facilities Chapter was written by General Bingham and her team, Colonel Foley. Right? Where's Colonel Foley? Wave your hand. All right. So with a little bit of input from others. And so that is going to be the primary document that integrates installations into the future of the Army Modernization Strategy, at least initially. There's other work underway with the Training and Doctrine Command to start to look at some of these things that were brought up. How do you fight in the strategic support area? And that will ideally evolve into sort of some doctrinal outcomes specific to installations.
Anybody else?
So while not specifically part of the question, Army Material Command is also leaning forward is in terms of the Army strategy, how we support that. So everybody, I think, knows that the Army strategy has this, is readiness is the main effort till we get to roughly 2022, phase line ready. Others have talked about it already. And then the Army main effort shifts to modernization until we get to phase line overmatch, I believe it is. And so what we're looking at internal to Army Material Command, and we're just getting out of the starting blocks on this, is partnering with Army Futures Command to shift our Army Logistics Assistance Program, which, LARS, Logistics Assistance Representatives that you're all familiar with, whether they're from AMCOM, TACOM, CCOM, or Joint Munitions Command, shift their main effort to assisting for units to get over the learning curve and to maintain modernized systems. That's not where we've been in the past. Where we've been in the past is we modernized the Army from a sustainment standpoint is, figuratively, to some degree, stepped aside and let contracted logistics support sustain these new systems the first couple years, or in cases of some systems, namely the Stryker, for more than a couple years to sustain those systems. And then the LARS have, literally, LCMC says, not my job, right? We'll let CFSRs or FSRs take care of that, because things that have hemmed us up, like intellectual property rights, territorialism, et cetera, et cetera. So we're on the front end of talking to Army Futures Command on how do we partner so when we get to phase line ready, we can shift the Army's resources toward the main effort and not have, sustainment resources in reserve. That's not to say we'll totally turn our back on legacy systems that are still will be the preponderance of our Army, but as a main effort to focus to rapidly build and integrate these new technologies into our formations.
Okay, thanks. This next question, I'm going to start, General Gamble, with you. Then I think Mr. Kidd may want to add a thought. And then again, any panel members from your perspective, happy to have you add on. How does the Army solicit innovation to address some of these issues, such as installation readiness, strategic power, projection, and industrial base readiness? How do we solicit innovation, I'd say internally to the Army, and how do we solicit innovation from industry?
So what, the AUSA at a national level is a great format for that, but General Perna holds us all accountable in AMC. Each of the commands runs a annual forum where we bring industry in. We call it the APBI. We just had ours at Rock Island about 2 weeks ago, where we ask companies to come in and partner with us. We give them insights into what we're doing, so we try to be transparent. And our goal is to lay out our priorities over the next couple years with a focus on, the next 18 to 24 months, to let industry really unleash the talent, help them envision what our challenges are. And so that's our primary mode in a broad sense, to partner with industry. And then at very tactical levels, we're partnered every day on unique mission sets that we may have. Earlier, John Sullivan mentioned weigh-in motion scale technology, and we're using that today across our power projection platforms to more accurately measure our equipment, whether weight, center balance. Those that have done this know what I'm talking about, right? Dimensional data, weight, axle weight, center balance, all that can be done driving 5 miles an hour over some scales that have a little bit of technology in them, as opposed to, right, put your front axles on a scale, put the back axles on a scale, measure, tape. You've all been there in the middle of the night trying to load an airplane, or in this case, really we're talking about is loading ships, because we can use that data to more accurately define our transportation requirements to the transportation enterprise. And a part of that strategic power projection piece, where we tie power projection from home station through strategic lift and then into the theater. And frankly, we're not really good at maximizing strategic lift. So we can be so much more efficient if we can, reduce human error. And that's what we're partnering with industry on that. Yes, sir.
So how does that get announced? How do your requirements get announced?
Yeah, thanks. So for that specific
The question for the WebEx, in case you didn't pick it up, is how does that get announced? How do those requirements get announced?
So that specific one, we put our RFP out and asked for proposals. I don't know the system, I'm sorry, Ferd. But, we do it, we announce it. We have an open competition. We had 2 vendors. One vendor met our requirements. We went with that one vendor. We bought 7 last year, 12 this year, with, FY 18 and 19 money. Interestingly, there was a protest. One of the vendors protested, but they didn't meet our requirement. So where industry can help is, so it held us up, right? The 7 I bought last year, when we looked at the 9 MFGIs and my count 22 power projection platforms. It's not everybody's count, right? Depends where you sit. But from an Army perspective, there's 22 power projection platforms across our Army. When you take into account USASOC and all the compos, and we needed 7 last year. We were counting pennies last year, but in FY 18 we needed 7 to outfit those power projection platforms where manual system would not meet the tip-fit timeline. So last year our focus was put technology, invest in technology just to meet the timeline. This year it was to be more efficient. But that last year money didn't get spent. We literally was delayed because I think, frankly, a frivolous protest. Because the company knew they didn't meet our requirements. Their protest challenged our requirement and inferred that we built a requirement to lead us to one company. So where industry can help us not only with technology and understanding how we can be smarter and faster to solve our problems, but also by being equally as transparent with us.
So one recommendation I would make. Do we have a mic? One recommendation I would make. It's not for you. It's for the WebEx. We need it. That's why.
Oh, I got it. So one recommendation I would make is to use the SBIR and the STTR process. That's been codified. I know small businesses and folks that work in labs are looking there. And so the note I made was that this SBIR that just came out through the BAA 19.2 has 35 topics on it. Not one of those topics has anything to do with an installation. And I think there's money and creativity that you should be grabbing at and throwing at us and asking us to, provide some creative solutions for some of those challenges.
Great, thank you. This next question is for, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So Secretary Beeler mentioned in his comments that we did sponsor with the Corps of Engineers an Installations of the Future Industry Day last month. It had about 420 participants, almost 200 different firms and organizations there. That was to get information on proposed use cases. Some of that information will be used to write RFPs for some of those use cases, and there will be some money in the out years to start to pilot projects across the installations. And we also watch closely those pilot projects that are occurring in our sister services.
I got one comment, General. I think that whenever possible, you ought to try to put out a draft RFP, get industry feedback, and maybe even have an industry day like Secretary Kidd was talking about, because that could tend to neutralize these rogue vendors, that they're trying to game it. And get our input before you actually publish it.
Yes, sir, thanks. So I don't think I want to characterize this vendor as a rogue vendor, but it was an interesting approach, right? In so much as, they didn't say you didn't make a fair determination. They said ours would work perfectly good. You don't understand. And we had a clear, set of requirements, and their system could not meet the requirement. But it did delay it. And the only reason I highlight it is sometimes the 12 that we bought with this year's money, that is an improvement. The 7 we were buying last year was not an improvement. It was decisive in our ability to meet a timeline. And so, it hurt us a little bit. Fortunately, we didn't go to war last year, right? Had we gone to war, we would have been stressed to meet the timeline. And shame on us for not recognizing that sooner, but frankly, we didn't, right? We didn't recognize it sooner, that the manual process just wouldn't meet our timeline. As soon as we identified it, we acted, and then, the solution was a little delayed.
Okay, this next question actually came in for General Gamble and Mr. Kidd, but I'm going to seek perspective from all of the panel on it because it's really at the heart of what this panel is talking about. It says, what are your thoughts on the prioritization of power projection infrastructure in comparison to facilities and housing? In other words, if you only had $1 more, where would you use the resource and why? And that's really been, it came up panel this morning, heart of this panel. So over to the panel, take it in turn. Anybody? We're going to start. Senior Commander wants to talk. That's good.
Yeah, it's an unfair question. But I'll go ahead and take a whack at it because, the housing situation that we've recently led our garrisons through is really kind of a perfect storm. And I was very impressed to see that our senior leadership, as well as our members of Congress, kind of had a clear understanding of how we got to where we are. But that's what we can see above ground. And I'm extremely concerned about what we don't know about the infrastructure below the surface, behind the wall, and whatnot. I know it sounds, it may sound like insensitive, but I've been through our housing, and maybe we could put 30 cents on the housing problem and 60 cents on the infrastructure. I'm afraid we have a crisis on the horizon with the status of our infrastructure, quite frankly, on many of our installations. And I do think we have to reinvest there. I think we have an opportunity. When modernization becomes the priority, the number one priority, we got to go back to modernization is not just about things. It's across the whole. If you're going to modernize, it's got to be doctrine, organization, training, manning, leader development, policy, and facilities. And so maybe we have the opportunity, if we can seize the day, and our installation management activity ties itself to at the hip to our modernization effort. So don't give me a new long-range precision fires capability without giving me the facilities that go with it, and move the whole thing together as a package, not just the thing. And we may be able to get incrementally better, because we didn't do that when we converted to HIMARS and MLRS, for instance, years ago, okay? And we're maintaining those things in 1960s facilities right now, and they're inadequate. So I know the crisis a few months ago was housing. I think our next major crisis is likely to be our infrastructure.
Thanks. Colonel Myer, you want to offer a Guard perspective on that question, please?
Sure. So with the respect to the Guard, I know over the past, 5 to 6 years, or maybe even 10 years, we've always been taking risk with installations, whether it's SRM, MILCON. Basically, they end up being the bill payer for, someone's got to be a bill payer, right? So ends up being a bill payer for some of these. Well, I think we're to a point, even on the Guard side, active, you name the component, where we've taken so much risk that I don't know if we're going to be able to catch up, because, for years I've heard all kinds of palm, we're going to take risk on this. And it just keeps going on and on. And for the Guard, I mean, we're at a point right now, if we don't actually stop put a mitigation in, we're going to have some issues with our facilities. I mean, we've got 19, like it was said, you got equipment that's in 1960s facilities. How do you do the maintenance on, well, it used to be a light infantry company, but now it's an artillery. Well, can't bring in the 155 into a bay that wasn't ever designed. It was designed for, maybe a 5-ton truck, so we need to, I think, have a focus on the installation, stop the degradation, and actually try to get us back up to speed where we need to be to support, the readiness effort that's going on. Otherwise, we're just never going to get there, because we're always going to be playing catch up. So that's my 2 cents.
So I feel compelled to add a slightly different perspective, maybe, but I'll just talk about my own command. I mentioned earlier we're counting pennies last year. So we've assumed risk in previous years by not fully funding my responsibilities for, so there's IMCOM responsibilities for SRM, and then there's mission unique SRM. So I'm responsible for that. So I'll only speak to my own responsibilities. We've assumed risk in my command over that. We've assumed risk in investing in the equipment needed for power projection over the years. But assumed risk means that we prioritize something else, right? I mean, that's what it means, right? We, the Army, and frankly, I'll just give you my own experience, because there's a couple young people here, and I'll just tell you what I believe, right? That if you truly prioritize against the most important mission set, you can move the ball with the money you have already. And I'm not preaching to anybody up here. I'm talking about my own command. Last year, I was counting pennies. I told you we bought 70 of these scales, but literally I'm like checking into seat cushions for nickels and dimes. And then it occurred to me that it's my responsibility to prioritize in my command. LRCs, Logistics Readiness Centers, have been a insolvent deficit industry for decades, right? Not since they came to AMC, but we haven't fixed it either. $150 million structural shortfall in logistics readiness centers every year. You can go back as far as you want. It's at least that. Actually, we got it down to 150 million. This last year, the first 50, the way we coped our way through that without shutting down LRCs, without going back to the Army, is took investment. $50 million is a sustaining rate of fire we need to invest in my responsibilities to keep the Army ready to project power through the LRCs. That $50 million sustaining rate is my estimate, and we haven't done it in years. The high water mark, if you go check the right? The bridge to readiness, the high water mark's at $6 million. That's the highest it's ever been in decades. $50 million is a sustaining rate of fire. We hit that sustaining rate of fire this year. I got no extra money, right? I had more missions come to me. I have missions, new missions, unfunded, come to me, come to my command at the rate of $2 in new missions for every $1 I can reform my way out of the hole, right? And General Perna's the Perna rules written inside my squad leader notebook are no more money, new missions are coming, create options inside yourself, and you're getting no more people, right? So in that environment, by true prioritization, this year we invested $50 million, right, with no more money. A bunch of new missions came our way. I didn't get one more person, right? So I just tell you, we get a lot of money. Congress gives us a lot of money in the United States Army. And if I'm just talking about myself, I'm not preaching to anybody up here. If we prioritize, truly prioritize, and the commanders are involved, you can move the ball. $50 million, and we're set to do the same next year, right? And no conditions have changed except for one thing, leader focus, right? And I'm not bragging about myself, I'm really bragging about my subordinate leaders, right? But for the young people in the audience, right, taking risk means you prioritize something else. Prioritize the most important thing, and you'll be amazed at what your people will do, right, if you truly prioritize, right? Which means you give them guidance, and you give them top cover, and you ask them, you assume risk somewhere, and you protect them and when they don't meet the standard somewhere else because you've prioritized something higher. So I'm sorry to be preachy. I'll shut up.
Comments? Okay, next question, and this is something that we have talked about as a panel, but this question, are there efforts, active or planned, that address the technology age gap? And the question comes from the perspective of the average 18, 19, and 20-year-old is more tech savvy and has expectations for the use of technology than the average individual in a position of authority, meaning those of us who are making decisions on how to invest in that technology. So how are we investing in technology and taking that into consideration for the installations of the future?
All right, so I'm not sure I'm going to answer the question directly other than to confirm how important it is. So we often talk about, if someone has grown up on it. I think that this question is important, is almost existential for the Army if we're going to remain a volunteer Army and attract people into our ranks. All right. So General Bingham and her team went out and took a poll of the young soldiers. Again, I'll direct. I think she's probably going to talk about it in a little while this afternoon. But if a kid has grown up on a smart installation or if a kid has grown up in a smart city, they don't want to move to a dumb installation. All right. And I will take the recruiting pool in Alexandria, Virginia, where my son is right now. The teenagers in Alexandria are probably more multimodal than AMC and General Gamble, okay? They have a choice between electric scooters, electric bikes, buses, metros, some of them Ubers, and last but not least, they will text their parents, okay? They can get around through 6 modes of transportation now seamlessly. They go on to an installation, they go through the same problem that you described, that JB described down here. They get issued a clipboard and a number 2 pencil and say, check in at building number such and such. Well, building numbers don't show up on Waze, okay, so they don't know how to get around. And we tell them they have to go buy a car because they can't get from their barracks to the motor pool. They don't want to buy a car. They want to rent a scooter. All right, and Uber can't come on to post. So I'm just confirming how important this question is, and it's really, I don't think it's not so much one of technology, but it's about recruitment and retention and maintaining connection to where our soldiers are growing up. 70% are now in an urban environment. All right, that's our recruiting pool. We're moving our Army marketing efforts to the suburbs and the cities. So we've got to keep up with that technology. And I know I didn't answer your question other than to confirm how important it is.
Anybody else? I would just add on that, one of the things we learned is that we talked about soldier and family services at the last panel, and our soldiers are going to expect services to be delivered on their installations through these apps. And so the investment in technology is important, and we now know, excuse me, and it may be the right decision, but that technology isn't being managed in this PEG, it's managed somewhere else. So how does the Army look across PEGs to ensure that the investment in technology that's alluded to in this question and in Mr. Kidd's answer is addressed to meet the needs of the future installation? Any thoughts on that?
I just chime in on one bit of that. You know, it harkens back to an old adage, you know, but it's not the same. If the Army had wanted you to have an app, they'd have issued you one. But the, you know, the youth that are going to make up our great Army are living out there in a different world than we grew up in. And we want to, you know, focusing in on things like, how do I get on post? How do I receive the service that's necessary at the point of need, and is it tailored to me? That's an expectation out there, whether we like it or not. And we can go to war with troopers that are frustrated, or we can go to war with troopers that have been enabled and empowered with the information technology that's been afforded to them. Right now, you know, if you live in the Northern Virginia area, you know that you operate in a vehicle, if you choose to buy one, with the rhythms of Northern Virginia. And those rhythms are driven by traffic. And if you miss the rhythm, you're hosed, and if you make the rhythm, you're good. Well, the same thing happens outside of our gates. Right now, we've got this huge congestion challenge outside of a lot of our gates as folks are trying to get in through these great force protection people that are looking at cards with eyeballs, when in fact, there's probably an expectation on most people that if I can drive around on 66 and I'm being paid a toll, I'm not suggesting we cause our soldiers to pay tolls, but there's an expectation I can get onto post, because the only reason I'm going onto post because the Army told me to get onto post. How come I've got to stop at the gate and be inspected? There's technology out there to allow us to do that. RFID tags, which are similar to fast pass capabilities, registered back to the installation database that says yay or nay, this person's allowed on, and it may not be at 60 miles an hour, but you can begin to reduce congestion. Online registration for installation access is available, and if anybody's left a CAT card in their computer when they left post and then try to get back on post for a lunch, knows that there's this, you know, there's this challenge with, do I go back to the VCC and wait in line, or do I call a buddy to meet me at the gate? Well, we can take advantage of things like we see at airports. We've got self-registration kiosks. Print us off a pass because we know who's there. Print that out. A guy or gal can go right into the base and reduce that friction associated with life on post by taking advantage of this technology that our soldiers are growing up in and around.
So take what JB said and just go ahead and apply it to every other thing we need. He's talking the gate, but we have soldiers that don't eat in the dining facility anymore, not because they don't like the food. They don't have the time to stand in the line to try to get access so they can get fed, something we owe them, by the way. So, I mean, you can take that same problem set and bring it into the installation, into any number of places where you need additional access, but it's borderline criminal that we make it difficult for our soldiers to actually eat, or for leaders to eat with their soldiers, because we got to stand in line for 15 or 20 minutes or more to get up there, present a credential, and maybe some cash when I don't know the last time any of my daughters did anything other than Venmo or something else to pay for something. I've never seen a nickel in any one of their pockets, but I know they're spending a lot of my money.
I added that. So how are we funding this technology?
So just quickly, can we, General Formica brought up the issue about PEGs and how we're funding it. And if I could, can we go back to General Gamble's first slide? Maybe.
He can.
No, we can't. All right.
No, he's very talented.
No. All right. Sorry.
He's very talented.
All right.
He'll
Now
do
keep
it.
going back. Keep going back.
General
Well, all right.
Gamble's, no, it was number 3, Greg. No, first slide of packet number 3. No, I'm sorry. The you have it listed as packet 1. General Gamble's. I can hold it up. No, you're good. We're good. We're good.
All right.
Thank you.
So, you know, the Army's really good at producing flash PowerPoint slides. Some of these PowerPoint slides actually have a lot of intellectual work behind them. All right. And this slide right here is perhaps one of the most important ones of the presentation, because we asked a question about funding, all right? And what this slide reflects is the IIPEG and the SSPEG being looked at concurrently to how they complement and reinforce in terms of building readiness inside the strategic support area. Mr. Gillis commented on how important that was in his talk earlier in the day, and I just want to go back and say this is not just another pretty slide. This is the real deal, and lots of credit goes to AMC, to the XMR staff, to the G4, and to ASALT in terms of taking this new look at PEG governance. And this is a big deal, and it will pay dividends over time.
Thank you. This one's directed at General Gamble, but again, there may be others with a perspective. What is AMC's plan to leverage, utilize, and maximize the return on investment from the assets and capability that all three components have to offer towards installation readiness and power projection? In other words, it's not just all the installation, I mean, all the landholding commands, so go ahead.
So there's a bunch of different facets to that. I'll tack it from a specific power projection and MFGI standpoint. So if I'm off, if I don't scratch your itch, please tell me. So as pointed out by the National Guard, we have two, high watermark of Afghanistan, Iraq. We had multiple active, mobilization force generation installations, and we had multiple CRCs where we deployed individual deployers. Today we have two. We have two active. Fort Hood, Texas, and Fort Bliss, Texas are active MFGIs. We have 7 dormant MFGIs are designated for a specific O plan, and there's only 1 CRC. So all the forces flow through these things, and they are multi-compo by nature. Of the dormant MFGIs, 2 belong to the Army National Guard, Fort McCoy, and Camp Shelby, Mississippi. So how we've leveraged everybody's skills and techniques. A year ago, a little bit, probably a year and a half ago, we were scrambling to set our power projection base while simultaneously setting theaters, and it was a bit of an all play, and all the compos of Total Army came together. So we looked at all available assets on all those MFGIs to pre-position the stocks that we needed to for full mobilization of our Army. We also looked at industry, right, to contract for capability that we're short on no notice. And we went around all the power projection platforms, all the MFGIs, and we capitalized on things like, and everybody's very flexible, Title 32 accountable officers who are overseeing Title 10 stocks at Camp Shelby, Mississippi today, right? Everybody's getting hiccuped all about, it was Title 32, Title 10. We just work through it, right? I mean, if we're going to have a MFGI that's a Title 32 installation, and we're going to put Title 10 stocks there that belong to a PM, a PEO, or the Army Working Capital Fund, right? We have a strategic choice. Do we get treated by a Chihuahua, or do we get on with the mission? And we got on with the mission. So we are leveraging things like that. Infrastructure, same way. We're looking across the Army still today and pre-positioning individual protective equipment, JS lists, medical supplies, et cetera, OCIE, RFI, stuff that you don't normally issue to a soldier unless he or she's deploying. And we're looking every nook and cranny of our installations, and some of that is Army Reserve, some of that's Army National Guard, some of that is active Army, some of it belongs to the LRC, some of it belongs to the garrison, some of it belongs to ForceCom. And so to pre-position these stocks, it really has been a team effort in order to set ourselves for power projection. When it comes to, if the day comes, or when the day comes, we have full mobilization in our Army, it'll be a team sport as well, right? There'll be, state U.S. FPOs will be, as the tsunami will hit everybody simultaneously. Whether it's the states that have to that are responsible to work the transportation data to get soldiers mobilized and out of their state, and the LRCs are working it for the National Guard and the active Army, or pardon me, the U.S. Army Reserve and the active Army all simultaneously. So I really do think we have a pretty good, kind of teamwork, multi-compo solution to this thing. Some of that is specified in Army regulation, and some of that's just, problem solving over the last 18 months. If I didn't answer your question, please let me know.
Okay, next question is for the panel. What lessons learned and practices can be applied from the vulnerabilities that have been exposed in the post 9/11 battlefield to improve the ability to project power from Army installations? Any specific lessons learned that can be applied? Open to the panel. Go ahead.
I'll talk to a couple. So a couple lessons learned is that, I think, without being too philosophical about it, human beings are, creatures of habit. And so one of the lessons learned early on, this lesson learned about 2 or 3 years ago, and I think we've learned the lesson. That's why this is no longer an observation. It is a lesson learned, and we changed our behavior. Before I was the Army Sustainment Command CG, I was privileged to be as part of the Strong Europe team in Europe. And the first units that came over to Europe as part of the rotational forces that came over, you could see it in their behavior that we have conditioned units to deploy as if they were deploying in an R4 Gen world, right? And I'll give you a couple examples. The active Army totally sucked, right? I mean, it was horrible the way they deployed, because the active Army generally deploys from an Army installation, right? And then they moved by rail, right, to the port. Where the Army National Guard and the Army Reserve, the limited amount of equipment we deployed, and again, on R4 Gen rotations into Iraq and Afghanistan, the limited amount of equipment we deployed from active Army units went from rail or barge, if you're at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and it would go to the port that way. The Army Reserve and National Guard would send it by truck, line haul, right? And that would go that way. And so years of R4 Gen condition us. So an active Army unit shows up in Europe in the winter, right? In the winter, knows they have to drive their vehicles from the port, but because they've been conditioned to rail load their stuff and to, move to a, essentially an operational support area in Camp Buring and kind of uncoil in the relative ease of a sanctuary, they show up. A wonderful U.S. Army Compo 1 unit shows up, a brigade shows up in Europe, and they don't have any tarps and bows on their Humvees. All the Army National Guard units show up with tarps and bows on their Humvees. They loaded the ship that way. They knew when they got off the ship, cognitively knew they were going to have to get in their vehicles and drive at least 64 kilometers to put their stuff on a railhead. And it was snowing, sleeting, sideways snow. And we had to change the RSOI plan in Europe to account for an active component unit that we would have put soldiers at risk having them drive vehicles down the Autobahn in that weather because they couldn't find their tarps and bows. They knew where they were. They put them in the container, the Mark Bravo Company and Charlie Company. They just didn't know where in the ship they were. And so we immediately took and sent that back. I mean, did 100 things right. Don't get me wrong. 100 things right. But that's the kind of lesson learned, right? And so we got back to home station. People start changing their behavior. The reason the Army National Guard and the Army Reserve showed up with their tarps and bows on is because how they were used to deploy. They were used to deploying on trucks, line haul that went straight from their mate site or their equipment concentration site straight to the port. And they didn't worry about people pilfering or ruining or defacing their tarps and bows. So they didn't see any problem with it. And so we've changed that as an Army. It only took once, and we've changed that as an Army, and we got people are more expeditionary in their mindset. Still sending people overseas. We're still sending people over harm's way, but they're doing it with some understanding that the environment, this multi-domain environment that's been described, it changes the game. There is no sanctuary. They got to roll off and be ready to fight. Maybe we'll be fortunate we won't have to fight from the port, but the mindset has changed. And so I hope that gave you one example of a lesson learned.
Open. Panel, anybody? Okay. I'm not sure I got the question exactly right first, so you can help me out here. But it's addressed to JB and General McKiernan, and it says, are installations prepared to be first adopters, and are they willing to bankroll these tests? Will the funds and tests require waiting 18 to 24 months for approval? I don't know, do you want to put some context in the question? Can we get him a mic, Michael, please?
So for the last couple of years, I've been working with small businesses. And there's a great deal of innovation and creativity in those communities, right? But two things are obstacles. One is, and that's the first part of the question was, is an installation capable of being a first adopter? You know, and some of this stuff doesn't have any relevance anywhere else. And so can something, you know, can a place like Fort Bragg say, okay, we'll try it? You know, we've got a place where we'll set up a little experiment to see if this works. Like you're talking about the building software that we talked about earlier. Let's see if we can do, you know, energy monitoring on this building based on your technology, you know. So that's part of that question. And there's a wide range of technologies and innovation, I think, that's out there. And can someone who's creative and innovative, you know, walk up to the garrison and say, are you in a position to be a first adopter? Because nobody else is going to try this and take a risk with it. And then the next part of that question is, when you're small, you know, working with the government means you have to meet palm cycles and be able to hold your breath. And I'm not sure if these small companies can really do that. You know, if the answer to is, we love your idea, and maybe we can bankroll it and palm it for, you know, a budget year or 3 years out, these companies and these ideas will evaporate. You know, they can't hold their breath up long. So those two-part questions. You know, is there funding in a system for the installation to apply these things quickly, you know, even if it's small amounts of money? And then is the garrison able to act as a first adopter?
So, you know, my observations in terms of mentally, is the garrison postured or ready to be a first adopter? I would say yes, because they're looking for innovative solutions to a whole host of problems. And I'll give you a little bit on that in a second. But I think you hit on the primary inhibitor, is there's not a lot of resources available for them to be really innovative, unless we're talking about, you know, replacing something that's already in place, right? But I've seen what I think is behavior that is very innovative. When I think of some of the intergovernmental service agreements that some of our garrison commanders have gone out and put in place, it shows this idea, I got to find a better way, right? And so if North Carolina Department of Transportation can pave roads at a fraction of the price that we would get, you know, if we bid it as a government entity, federal government entity, then why wouldn't we do it? And so those sort of things show that level of innovative spirit. I think we do have some challenges, but if it's an innovation that will allow us to reduce the BMM doing garrison support functions, it's probably something that a garrison commander or an installation would be very interested in trying to get to. Yes, I guess would be my thought, whether that's access control or automating something that right now we have to dedicate military manpower to, if that answers your question, Ferd.
Good. It's about coming to, sir. So if you have discretionary funds,
No.
and the question also then is about the funding piece. You know, does he have discretionary funds? Somebody walks into his door in July, you know, August, you know, and will he have something that he could throw at it and say, yeah, let's try it?
So Ferd, real quick, I think that the spirit that Brian talked about is certainly there. About the funding, I mean, I'm not a senior commander at the magnitude that Brian is, but I'm a senior commander at Little Rock Island Arsenal. So it pales in comparison to, they have gyms at Fort Bragg, soldier fitness centers at Fort Bragg that are bigger than my whole installation. But That's not true. But put two of your stadiums together, right? Maybe but I do think if there is a direct cost benefit analysis, they can always go to their higher headquarters, MCOM, right? People will be wildly interested. And so at APBI, our Advanced Planning Board for Industry, last 2 weeks ago, I described there's 4 scenarios, and I told them 3 of them I'm wildly interested in. The one I'm not is more readiness for more money, right? Now, unless we've been totally negligent in something, I'll speak for myself. I've been negligent in my responsibilities in the past, and so you got to throw money at a problem to fix something that you haven't been watching. Yes, but the other 3, more readiness for the same amount of money, more readiness for less money. That's a gold ring, right? Same readiness for less money. All are great reform, right? Areas that people are willing to invest in. Where I think maybe we got to improve as an Army is given like a simple framework. Because what I do is I call a lawyer every time, right? And say, hey, come here. Is this fair? Is this equitable? Is this legal? Right? How can we get the yes one here without being too creative? Right? Get on the slippery slope. Nobody wants to do that. So that's it for me personally. That's been the biggest impediment, right? Is understanding kind of the framework. And I'll be honest with you, I still don't have a framework because every one of these is so unique. I'll have to go to some professional that can study it. And so what slows my response is seldom money, right? Because first is the screening criteria, right? The 3 I described, the one that I'll screen out the one. And then the second step is, can I do it? If I can get past the screening criteria, then can I do it? And should I do it becomes really easy if there's a payoff, right? Because the garrison commander certainly doesn't have the money, right? But MCOM might, right? The senior commander might, et cetera.
Okay, thanks. I've got 2 questions that we didn't get to, both for General Gamble, so I'll give them to him, and if your question wasn't asked, you can link up with him after General Bingham. In the interest of time, because we do want to be able to hear from her, 20 seconds, 30 seconds max, starting with General Burton, closing thoughts on this panel.
Well, sir, thanks for the opportunity. Going back to a original question, earlier question, where do you prioritize your efforts? Well answered by the panel. I wouldn't expect it to be anything other than that, but I would offer that, you can have the best honed broadhead in the world laying on the notch of your bow, but if you got a frayed bowstring, the intended outcome is probably suspect. This is a great opportunity here for all of us to learn from current Army senior leaders to figure out what their challenges are, addressing your issue, Ferd. And I have found nothing more concerning in my time in industry than trying to peddle a solution in search of a requirement. And number 2, not being able to work with a partner on the government side to further develop the solutions as they were articulated. So I do see this as a continued partnership, and General Ham, Leidos truly appreciates the partnership we enjoy with AUSA. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Colonel Myer.
So closing thoughts, I think that, a lot of the topics that the discussion was focused on, how do we get this innovation to modernize our installations? How do we get access to develop, like a new technology or to get into the door? I think Army's Futures Command's probably part of that, as well as ASA, IE&E, to try to get those research and development funds available so we can actually modernize. But developing those requirements for, near, midterm, and far term for installation modernization, I'm not sure if that's, I know we're working on it, we talked about it, but how that comes to realization to get to where we need to be to, have an installation of the future that's modernized, I think that's kind of the key to success here. Getting access, taking advantage of, industry out there, because they got a lot of good ideas, but they come to the door, sorry, I don't have this many O&M dollars and I can't do that because I'm already, short trying to maintain my other stuff. My other requirements. We need to be able to use industry to kind of springboard into what a future installation could be, and I think we're shortchanging ourselves if we don't allow that to happen and better integrate, our research and development funding that's out there, because I know I don't get our research and development funding, but in the Army headquarters that's available to do. So maybe better integration there, and That's my thought.
Okay, thanks. General McKiernan.
Thanks again for the opportunity, and I'll just say I'm optimistic about the way ahead, and I say that because we're thinking right when you look at the framework, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I think up to this point, we've been looking at the problem from the top down, and I really do think we have to flip the script and look at it from the installation level, because as General Becker said earlier today, each installation is unique in a variety of ways. And across the components. And so we really have to put the intellectual energy into thinking, how do we modernize not just the installations, but the processes we use for resourcing the installations. And so, you know, I'm optimistic, but I do think we have to take a look at it from what is that installation supposed to provide for the Army, and then that would drive the solutions that we might look at. And then I would say the other thing is we don't need to invent a process for modernization, because we already have one in the Army, but it's not one that we've applied really in any significant way against the installation problem set. So let's not make up a new process. Let's understand how to adapt the processes to this problem set that needs to be modernized, if that makes any sense.
Thanks. General Gamble.
Thanks, sir. So this has been an absolutely wonderful day. Thank you again. Only AUSA can put something together like this. I thoroughly enjoyed all the panels, and I hope I didn't blow the curve by my participation. The last thing I'll say is, you know, lots of work's been done over the last roughly 2 years, maybe a little bit more than 2 years, to set the, you know, what we would now call the strategic support area for full mobilization. If we had to fully mobilize our Army in support of a large-scale ground combat operation somewhere in the world, I just leave it with this. While we got lots of work to do, we have an executable plan today to mobilize the Army, to get them through MFGIs, to move people and equipment where it needs to be moved. Theaters are set with the warfighting requirements they need, and it's all been a great team effort. And again, we got tons of work to do, and to hold our stance the way we are. But I you know, just if it doesn't keep me awake at night at all, because I know we have an executable plan. It'll be hard, but you know, there's old Army adage that says if you have a C plan, you know, add leadership and great American soldiers, you'll get A execution. We got a good solid B plan, right? So we're in a good place. Thank you.
Thanks. And Mr. Kidd.
Great. Well, first of all, I'd like to again thank everyone on the panel and General Formica. You know, thanks for all your leadership here to break this happen this afternoon, and for AUSA for giving us a venue. I think this has been a great day. I've been coming to these, you know, for years now in a variety of different roles and functions, and they just keep getting better and better. So thank you for AUSA. So if I have a fear, my fear is that we're going to build this ready. We're going to go through the renaissance that Secretary Esper talks about. We're going to build this ready, modern, lethal Army that's an overmatch for any adversary, and then it's going to be stuck here and not able to deploy and to be able to, you know, if you will, impose our will upon others. But listening to the panel today and being part of the process the last 2 years, I'm a lot more optimistic. So as General Gamble said, we have set the doctrinal conditions for the strategic support area. This year we've set the funding conditions for the strategic support area. We're wrestling a little bit with the doctrinal conditions. You know, how do we fight through some of the cyber things? But General Fogarty and others are addressing those issues. And I'm very confident that this Army is going to address this issue and solve it, just like we've solved all sorts of other issues in the past. And so I'm proud to be part of this team effort and to work with others out there. So thanks again.
Okay, we're out of time. I just want to add my thanks to AUSA for this and for all you do. Thanks to the panel for your thoughtful comments, and thanks to you for your active participation and for your questions. As we address the challenges and opportunities for the future of our Army installations, we're reminded, as we always are, that this is really all about protecting and enabling our most critical assets, soldiers, civilians, and families who live and serve on those installations and who will deploy from them. And it's for them that we're doing this. And I thank you all. AUSA, thanks again.